similar. Because another Hindu temple has been vandalized in Australia, allegedly by Khalistani supporters. Shri Shiva Vishnu Temple in Melbourne was painted with anti-India and anti-Hindu graffiti. This is the second such attack on a Hindu temple in 5 days in Melbourne. On 12th of this month, Swaminarayan Mandir was also smeared with hate messages, again against Hindus and against India. The latest attack came on notice on 16th January when the devotees thronged to the temple for darshan and to celebrate Pongal festival. The attack comes just hours after the Khalistani supporters on the evening of January 15 allegedly tried to garner support for a referendum through a car rally in Melbourne. Temple after temple is under attack outside of India. Yet, why is there no acceptance that Hindus truly are under attack? Just last week, as I mentioned, in Melbourne on January 12, Hindu temple was desecrated and vandalized. Anti-Hindu graffiti was painted on walls. Before this, in Birmingham in September last year, an Islamist mob ambushed a Hindu temple, climbed on top of the walls and abused Hindus. Before that, in Leicester, another Hindu temple came under attack. Saffron flag outside the temple was pulled down in front of cameras and the police. And remember, there has been shades of this even in Canada. In Toronto, Swaminarayan Temple was defaced with anti-India graffiti on September 15, 2022. Isn't Hindu hate real? And isn't the world going soft on it because Hindus are minorities in these countries? We'll ask that big question to our guests next. Let's go across to the guests who are joining us. Puneet Sani is an activist joining us from New York. Sarah L. Gates is from Dharmic Ecology, Hindu human rights activist joining us from Australia. Dr. Monica Varma is a strategic affairs expert based in India. Sarah, I want to come to you first up. This is the second such attack that has happened in Melbourne. Traditionally, there is no history of conflict between different religions in Melbourne. I've been to Melbourne recently and before as well. It's a truly multicultural multiracial community. Why do you think such attacks on Hindu temples are increasing?
Well, this is coming in the wake of a Khalistan referendum, which is being amplified by a number of different authentic and inauthentic accounts from around the world on social media. It's been building up here for quite a while. This type of rhetoric being displayed on banners, graffiti and even on Gurudwaras is becoming commonplace. It's created an atmosphere of hatred toward Hindus, and unfortunately this has not been effectively curbed by the administration of these organisations, and they are registered charities for the main part. We've had 10 banners removed from around Victoria, around Melbourne, including one that was in Federation Square. So I think that the problem is that this particular sector of the diaspora doesn't understand Australia's multicultural values, probably hasn't grown up here and had that instilled in them in Australian schools like the rest of us, and seems to think they can act with impunity. Okay. Vilifying Hindus and committing hate crimes against Hindus. These are not the only hate crimes. We did see around the Harris Park incident that 2 Sikhs were charged with 93Z offences, and they didn't actually make the media, so we don't know what the outcome of those offences were. All we heard about was the one Hindu nationalist who was involved. You might have heard of Vishal Jude, and he was made an example of, and I think the media failed to present the case holistically, and alienated, marginalised, vilified and demonised the Hindu community as if they were the ones to blame. But this came in the wake of a Khalistani and anti-Hindu sentiment growing among this particular section of the community.
I wish I could say that this was only a few people who don't understand Australia or Melbourne's multiculturalism and therefore they are doing this. But unfortunately, this is the reality in many other countries and it just doesn't get spoken of in the same measure. For example, if a mosque was attacked in India, it would be global headlines. A church is attacked, global headlines. Here you have in 1 year 4 temples attacked in full public view, and yet people just don't want to talk about it. I want to go across to Puneet Sani. Puneet Sani, if Khalistani separatism, if this is behind it, is degenerating into from a political fight into a complete anti-Hindu tirade, then surely these countries have to recognize it for that.
Namaste, Jai Maa Bharti. Thank you for inviting me. You have a point, I actually think, so for example, but there are 2 points to it, right? So why are these things increasing? So what are the incentives and what are the costs? I'm a student of economics. You called me an activist, but I am a student of economics.
Okay.
So if you do this, what the Khalistanis, their incentive is in spreading the hatred. And they are succeeding. And that's why they will keep on doing it. You are talking from a moral perspective because your incentives are there should be peace. So the question is, what is the Indian government that can inflict the cost on these people? Because, for example, there are, right, if you see, Sarah also can tell you, if you are a patriot, especially in diaspora, and you speak against, brotherhood or for the nation, there are only cost on you. And if you do this langar, you will get maybe a Pravasi Bharti award or something like that. So there are only incentives, like if you be a radical and the government tries to appease you. So this is, we have to understand, because the locus of responsibility lies on yourself. What is the Indian government doing? Our incentive is there should be peace and communal harmony. Are we offering the incentives and putting the cost on people who are disrupting it? We just
but
can't.
But these crimes are not taking place in India. So ultimately, the first responsibility also lies with the government where these crimes are happening. They have to recognize this as hate crimes.
Right. But the thing is, the cost on the average Australian is not so much. So the thing is, what is happening in Australia is pretty much a copy of what happened in Canada. And if you study what happened in Canada, the Canadian whites were like, okay, these two ethnic groups are fighting. What do we know about it? We don't care. But the thing is, the Indian government can do, these are terrorists or these are criminals. They are disrupting. Even if you see the farmer protesters, so much of came from Canada. So, you have like high commission relations. You say, if you don't behave, we are going to, make it charge the affairs or something like that. So again, this is what is happening is very, very dangerous. I think we are slipping back to like the 80s and 90s, and we have suffered so much. So Indian government should be very proactive and, figure out a way where they can inflict the cost on these people who are up to this.
I get your point, Puneet, but I still fundamentally feel that there's responsibility for these so-called multicultural democracies, liberal countries that preach everybody else, including India, on a daily basis on how minorities should be protected and what multiculturalism and true secularism and multi-religionism is. Why don't they show that on their ground? How can they allow a minority Hindu community in their cities terrorized like this? This is not about understanding two groups and you don't understand because you are some idiot, you don't understand what these groups are fighting about. I'm sorry. This is not about that. No. This is about one person taking the law into their hands and terrorizing another community. One-sided hate. It's not that difficult to identify that.
You're absolutely right. The subtle point I'm trying to make is what you're making is a moral point. What the Australian government is, like this Khalistanis, you see how they basically join up each other. So they guys, what is the cost on us? Right now, the cost on even putting a hand on this Khalistanis, you see how they are basically work and they get SGPC involved and they get this Khalsa Aid involved. Like this Khalsa Aid, Sarah will tell you better. They were not allowing this, this Punjabis to celebrate Baisakhi. This Khalsa Aid said, this is a Sikh festival. And, there was a mixed Hindu-Sikh couple. They made their life hell. And nobody came to their defense.
So you're saying that the back-end support to the Khalistanis is just too strong, that even India and other countries are not being able to break the back of that Khalistani terror. Let me bring in Monica into this too. Monica, look at the pattern. You look at what happened post some religious conflict and clash in UK last year that began in Leicester, right? There was an entire cabal that devoid of any facts. In fact, in the face of facts, kept accusing the Hindu community of being aggressors, completely whitewashing the Islamist mobs in that city, in Leicester and Birmingham. Eventually, the truth had to come out. Anyways, too much is recorded on videos these days, so you can't escape it. But there is a culture of demeaning Hindus even when they are the ones who are the victims of such crimes.
I think, Shivani, you're right. There is a pattern to it. And, if we basically, get down to this pattern and we unpack it, what we find is that Hindus today are a target. And they are not just attacked on one front, that is by the Islamists, but they are now also being attacked by the Khalistanis. So on one hand, there's this Hindu and the Muslim divide, which is being exploited to the core. And they're also using the fact that, after 2014, we have BJP in power. So they're creating all kinds of, stupid propagandistic ideas that, this government is pro-Hindutva party and Hindus are responsible for this. So there's a widespread Hindu phobia or Hindumesia. And now this, is being used as a pretext to attack Hindus. If you look at the coverage of the Leicester violence, especially, they were sort of pointing out that it is a crime by the Hindutva people and Hindus are bad, and that kind of an imagery was used. But just tell me, if temples are destroyed and damaged and, such graffiti is drawn on the temple walls, not just in Canada, but also in UK and now in Australia as well, then where the Hindus are at fault? So, there is, so two things.
That is what I'm saying. So what do you think, Monica, what do you think? Is this because Hindus are not very organized? They don't have a political version of their religious identity, that they are not taken seriously at a global stage as a bloc? Their sentiments don't matter. Even when they're victims, they are blamed.
See, definitely, Hindus need to organize themselves because, as experience can tell us, if we look at the Abrahamic religions and especially, look at the Jews, they have been able to collectivize their efforts. They've been able to, point out. And in many countries, if you question the Nazi thing that happened, it's a punishable offense. But when it comes to Hindus, anyone can basically come on even an Indian platform and end up saying that the Kashmir files is basically, a piece of propaganda. So that's the kind of thing, that Hindus have been tolerating for so many years. And now that attacks against Hindus have become so widespread, so mainstream, I'm sure the Hindus and especially the educated ones will realize the power of lobbying, and they'll realize the power of
that's one way to go. But Sarah, I want to understand from you too, how seriously are these attacks being taken in Melbourne and in Australia generally now? Do you think that the government is waking up, that there is a section that is particularly targeting Hindus?
Yes, they do know who they are. They do know what's going on, and that's because each of us have informed them and continue to send information through to the security hotline. And anyone can do that, by the way. If they see anything online, they can just forward it to the security hotline. So we have been informing the Australian Federal Police, ASIO, and state police. But I think the issue comes when there's different look. There's a lot to be said about this, so I'm just trying to get my point across in the most productive way. Australian media has blacked this out. Australian media have been platforming the voices of activists who have been targeting, cyberbullying, harassing, writing submissions and lobbying in the BDS style against Hindus, and also the same groups lobby against Jews. So there is a continuity today between anti-Semitism and anti-Hinduism because of the way that these activist groups have aligned and amalgamated, like you were mentioning before, Monica G. And Puneet, you're both aware of this. Islamists, Khalistanis, communists, and to some extent Congress supporters who are in diaspora have aligned with these against this BJP Hindutva kind of like, anti-India type of rhetoric.
Yes. But what they're ending
in the same way that
Sarah,
anti-Semitics are anti-Israel and they attack Jews. It's identical. So I think the government needs to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, the government cannot be an ignorant or a mute spectator party to this. They fundamentally have a responsibility to not allow anybody being terrorized. Puneet, final words from you. I get your point that you're making that India needs to increase the cost on such activities. What would you like seeing, for example, such community do at their level? From what Sarah is describing, this is a concerted campaign, almost on the lines of anti-Semitic campaigns that Hindus are facing in these global communities now. And the world is just watching it, maybe because the power of the lobby is too strong. What do you think local communities can do against this then?
No, I think even like local communities, you see, for example, what is happening now. For example, Sarah is saying in Australia, I am saying in New York. Right now, it's basically a lone wolf kind of, like people inspired by their own thing. Like the government is completely absent. And the other side, they don't have so much support, but they are allied with all this, what she said, communist and Islamist and anti-Hindutva brigade or whatever. So, like there are individuals who can, speak up and do it, but it is not something sustainable. And what you talk about community, like they have bullied the communities because they resort to violence. I just give you one example, your mind would be blown. So, for example, we all remember the ghastly scene that happened on October 15th in this Kisan Andolan, where this Nihangs lynched. And actually, he was a Sikh man that they lynched. Yes. Do you know exactly 1 month before, on 15th September, this happened in Brisbane. So, they fought and they chopped off the hand of somebody in Brisbane, Australia. So, these people are violent criminals. So they have basically the community, the decent people have nothing. So the Australia has to enforce the rule of law. You can't fight with the criminals because it is not a debate that we speak of. What we are dealing is with violent
This is
criminals.
Basic criminal activity. That's all I'm saying. You have to at least apply your laws. Forget about the ideology and the ideological war. And I think from what you're describing is fundamentally what's happened in India over the decades being replicated outside of India. The media, the influential cabal, certain political aspects, Islamists all combining and basically terrorizing Hindus and virtually condemning Hindus and making being Hindu a bad thing. So we'll leave it at that. It's important to have these discussions to understand how this pattern works. I thank all of our guests for sharing their perspectives and their information. Time for a very short break. On the other side, a quick update of the biggest stories of the day.